Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, thank you very much for tuning in. This is Songwriter Support, and today I want to talk about something that's really important and something that I've recognized for a very long time, that streaming has always been a scam. Now, what do I mean by that? I think now more than ever, we're starting to realize that these companies are doing whatever they can do to not only capitalize on the streaming, but really make it harder for people who are trying to get into this, who are trying to put their art out there, who are trying to even spread the word of God or make a podcast, do things like that. Show their creativity. They're realizing that the platforms that are used to get it out there are always too much about the money and not enough about helping people get engaged with their experience. Now, what do I mean by that? If you really look at the origins of streaming audio, let's look back at one of the earliest kind of scams that I had recently watched a YouTube video about, Mark Cuban. You know, I never understood how that man made money. And when you look back in the 90s, he was somebody who claimed that he was one of the first people to pioneer radio online and streaming radio online. Now, if you actually look back at what happened, not only to the companies that he had worked with and he had bought, but then on top of that, the timelines of where some of the earliest streaming softwares were created to play audio, like Real Audio Player, which if you ever used that, that's like in the 90s. That's really when streaming audio online had started. Not necessarily music, but radio, right? And you look at that and you start to realize that he paved his way by paying people off and paying people to essentially either take less or do things with the shares so that he could have the name, the recognition, the brand, and then use that to invest in other things. But what I want to focus more on is the timeline that I'm more familiar with, which when I was young, I was playing RuneScape, that era. You know, Real Audio Player was a thing. It was just a thing that was downloaded. But that was in the era when I would buy stuff off of iTunes. So, you know, artists were getting royalties for people buying whole CDs or their songs. And, you know, that was back when I used to listen to Metallica, 3 Days Grace, the middle school me. That was the person who had the iPod first gen or second gen, whatever the smaller one was, not the big 256 gig one, but the smaller ones, right? That maybe were like 8 gig, and you can load a ton of songs on them. That was the days, and in that in between era, right? People were burning CDs. So what came along, which I think is super important, was Napster. Before any of the streaming platforms that we see today, that led to, I think, more of the industry becoming more scam-like. So if you look at early Napster, right, that was back in the day when people were just getting hip to streaming audio, and all of these major bands like Metallica, which bringing them back, they were pivotal in trying to get people rights at that time because they were realizing Napster was just taking the songs, ripping them off of CDs, uploading it to their catalog, and then making it accessible to people so they could either stream it on their website and then they could run ads, other things, get their money that way, or have people download it and getting the traffic, getting people to Napster. And eventually it got shut down. But what's interesting is, if I'm not mistaken, the current CEO or one of the founders of Spotify was the founder of Napster. So I think that the tactics that have been used back then, doing things for money and not necessarily just to get people engaged and connected with the music, reigns true today. And now that, money has gotten more tight, inflation has gone up, those companies, now that they've gotten all the subscriptions and gotten all the people, they don't want to pay people for the royalties that they deserve, even though we already have rights for it now. Those have been created. So in the Napster days, right, there was also the era of LimeWire, which I think it kind of coincides or was a little bit later. It kind of like extended the Napster era, because that was the era where Soulja Boy really took off. And if you know anything about how Soulja Boy would build his career, he would not only use MySpace, but he would use LimeWire to essentially, take a song, because every song has a file, right? When you get into streaming. And he would take a song that was his, like, I don't even remember some of his most famous songs right now. They're just slipping right by. But basically, he would take very famous songs like a Michael Jackson song or a Mariah Carey song and strip the metadata, which that data told you exactly what song it was. So when you put your CD in your vehicle or in your Walkman, like a CD player, it would tell you, okay, it's this song, this track on this album. And that data was used not only for, sales, but just so that you would know what you were listening to. So basically, he would just take his song, strip the metadata from another song, put that in there on LimeWire, so somebody who's thinking they're downloading Michael Jackson, no, they were downloading Soulja Boy. So there was many tactics in that era of LimeWire that were used to scam people, not necessarily out of their money, but out of their time and their attention. So then now they can focus on, hey, who is this that I downloaded this from? Who is this? And then eventually the song getting the recognition and getting on the radio, getting into other, places and being spread around. So in that era, that was that transition between us still having CDs or like a book of CDs in your car and having mixtapes. So like if you couldn't afford an album, you would go on LimeWire, you would rip off like a few mixtapes or, depending on who you were listening to and where they had it, right? You would download it, make your own CDs. I don't even know if there's people that are watching YouTube right now that remember having a CD burner or like using a CD burner, burning your own CDs, or like having a computer that had a CD burner or a way to burn CDs, and then going on, popping it in your car or like popping it in your CD player, your portable CD player, and listening to your favorite songs. Now, as that was transitioning, it eventually went into iTunes. And now what is later Apple Music. So if you think about it, right, iTunes was like the way for people to actually get legal songs, like with the actual album art, the real metadata, and the artist was able to get a royalty or a split. But if you think about it, a lot of times if you know anything about Apple, there is a product to use the product. There is a dongle for the dongle. And in the same way, if you were uploading to Apple Music or if you're uploading to a platform like that, they want their percentage because they're saying, hey, this is our marketplace. And because we're putting this on our marketplace, you don't deserve 100% of what you put into here. What you deserve is majority, but we're going to take a pretty good chunk of that. I don't remember what the rates were back in the day, and they may have worked much like a lot of credit card companies where if you had a certain volume or say you were like a large label like Universal Music Group or Sony, They probably negotiated a rate with them to put it on their platforms. Their platform, excuse me. And, iTunes revolutionized people actually paying for songs and making it so they can download it, have it forever, have it as a file on their computer. Well, eventually it just got to this point where LimeWire, the Pirate Bay, YouTube, people could just strip whole albums and put them on YouTube, put them on different platforms. So eventually it got to this point where, now they have to create these new copyright systems. They have to create these new ways for people to not only make money off of music, but then new ways for people to claim music when it was being stolen. Because now they're realizing, hey, this isn't the days where it was harder to track people back in like the LimeWire days. I mean, they definitely could, but I would say it was just harder because it was harder to be able to access the information, whereas like now it's a lot more readily available. Everybody has access to this technology. So you start to realize early on the things that pioneered people getting their careers launched kind of was scammy in a lot of ways. And not only from some of the earliest streaming audio and the way that people created their entire businesses, but then look at the things that pioneered the new copyright systems and the ways that people are able to claim music now. Okay, and now it got to this point where people were like, I don't want to have to keep buying new albums. There's so much music out there. I don't have the money for that. So that's when iTunes slowly started getting pulled away and stripped away. iTunes was the era when Zune, if anybody remembers a Zune, like when that was created and Windows tried doing their own thing, and Apple was really dominating the market with the iPod and the iPhone and like revolutionizing technology in that way. And it eventually got to this point where people are like, I don't want to pay for music. I just want to hear it. And, they didn't want to listen to the radio. Not everybody wanted to listen to things in their car only. They wanted to be able to go to the gym, put their earbuds in and work out, or and they didn't want to have to carry a clunky CD player or, attach headphones. So eventually it got to this point where now we are where we are, which is SoundCloud came into the mix, Spotify came into the mix, Apple Music came into the mix, and then tons of other streaming platforms came into the mix. And now the scam of the modern industry is a lot more convoluted because, and I pray you stick around for this entire video, because this part blew my mind when I experienced it. Because with Spotify and with Apple Music and with other platforms, right, there's an entire other grift that happens outside of Spotify, but it's allowed. You know why? Because the labels use it. They do. And if you use it and you use the wrong services, then they take down your music. But if a label does it, that's just payola. And wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Sorry, it's like Twitch there. That's been going on for a long time. This industry has been very prone to payola, which is paying to have more reach, more service, more exposure. Paying for exposure, right? So I experienced this. And at first it was, small websites, right? That's like the easy grift. That's the ones like, oh, I spent $5. And then you realize like, oh man, I just wasted my money. And then your song gets taken down, and then possibly your account can be taken down. Then you get the more complicated ones where you might meet somebody who's had some label connections. They seem legit. they're like, oh yeah, I can get you to the right people. Like, I can get you on top of Apple Music. I can pay for, a Billboard single. Yes. I've known more than one person that has told me that. It's like, oh yeah, if you have about like $10,000 or so. And that was like a few years ago, so it might be different now. But the grift now is not only speaking about, okay, Spotify changing the ruling, and then now us finding out that there's these like alias artists that, it's one guy or a few people and they have over 600 aliases making these songs that all sound very much the same and putting slightly different names, different artwork. And it's like, especially now knowing the era of AI music is basically churning out tunes so that these companies can make a profit. Because the way it works is you stream the song, the artist is supposed to get the royalty. Whoever owns it, right? Whoever owns the metadata, the information, which I talked about earlier, whoever owns that. Because, the artist can create a song. Any artist can create a song. But who truly owns that is what they want. And that's why it has been so difficult for you or anybody to get the exposure that you want, is because there is a whole system that is in place that is designed to pay the owner of the content, not the artist. Most of the time, that's the last person. That's like the very last person. Unless it's like, the producer or the mix engineer. If they get that, anymore, they're usually doing flat rates and getting paid for their work outside of that, depending on how big they are and what kind of relationships they have, right? But knowing that basically, because the industry shifted so much to, I don't want to pay for physical media, let alone seeing an artist perform live on stage, to I just want to hear the song. There was all these different rules put into place. But then what I started realizing was the grifts that were going on outside of it. The people that are trying to say, hey, I can get you exposure. But then you being the owner of the song, right? You don't realize that the issue is even if they're like, oh yeah, I'm legit, I've worked with labels, they build their credibility, they do it that way. Depending on the way that they do it, you may not actually see royalties from it. And I had an experience like that when I was going by a moniker Midnight Swami. I don't do that anymore. I don't make secular music anymore. The kind of music that I focus on is honestly like Christian rap, Christian hip hop. I gave my life to God very recently this past year, and it's changed a lot in me. And it made me realize like how much I learned just seeing the grift unfold in front of me, and how these systems are designed to get people to not only forge their time and their attention towards the streaming, right? But then those who really want to get their message out there, who are just starting, right? It makes it harder for them to get the reach that they need without having to shell out their own money, experience a grift, and may not even be able to claim on the royalties that they got. Their song just has inflated numbers. And I had that experience where I paid for it, and a year later, I was like, why am I only seeing like 50 cents for a song that I got 40,000 plays, 50,000 plays for? And I contact Spotify. I contacted United Masters because that was the distributor I used. And I said, hey, like, I paid for a service that told me that this would advertise to, real people, and it had me on multiple playlists, and I wasn't the number one on the playlist. I was just like in different spots, and they're telling me, oh yeah, these are people I know. This is legit. I'm building these connections for you. And I contact United Masters, and their fraud department comes back and said, yeah, Spotify said that there was artificial streams on this song. And I was like, well, why won't they take it down? Like, I asked United Masters fraud department, and they were like, that basically that's up to Spotify. So Spotify's aware. It just depends on who. It just depends on who you're talking to, because if you're doing it through the wrong methods, they'll take it down. They don't care about inflating numbers. They don't care about you. What they care about is money. So that's why they've been using these people, these aliases that I'm not aware, but it seems like to me that they're paying them, probably a flat rate, having them generate these songs or make songs and then use that material to AI train something and then monetize off of it because you're listening to it. You're like, oh, this is a cool jazz lo-fi playlist. I'm going to just do this to study or read the Bible or whatever, right? And you don't even realize there's maybe this much part of it that was human. Like maybe the source material to create it, but the actual music itself was probably generated. And then that's getting millions of plays, getting on a major playlist that is put together by the company that's streaming this said music. And then now they're claiming the royalties on it because they own it. So you start to realize, like, wait, all these companies have been scamming in their own ways. It may not look like that at first, but if you really think about it, like you really think about the origins of streaming and of how the technology even got into, how we even got to the point where we could pay people for streams. Like the only reason why that came into place is because enough people got scammed. Enough people at the top got scammed, and they said, hey, stop scamming us. So think about that. It's okay if you support Spotify, if you support artists by listening to their music, because if the artist has a majority ownership, they're still getting paid. However, the rates are not what they used to be. They're putting new rules in place. And clearly these companies that are trying to sell you a product or a service, like a distributor, like United Masters, DistroKid, TuneCore, they don't help you promote it. They're just saying, oh, we'll get it out to there. We'll be the middleman for you to get your music on these platforms. And for you to actually go directly to Spotify or go directly to Apple Music and say, hey, I want my music on your website, they won't do it. In most cases, they won't unless you know somebody. So it makes you really wonder, like, knowing the history and knowing how things have shifted as as people who create music, right? How much are we getting scammed? Not only with people paying for memberships or, the fact that now SoundCloud, it doesn't have unlimited uploads. Like you only have a limited amount. And the only way to really get people to support you in a way that actually is beneficial to you is by making your own website or like your own Patreon or some sort of other way of doing it. It just goes to show that the industry itself of streaming is a scam. And it's sad to say that, but I think the good news in all of that, right, if you made it this far in the video, is understanding that at the end of the day, if it exposes what message you want to put out there, then I think you won. Because if there's anything I've learned over the past few years, it's not about money. You know, I was working in retail for one of the largest retailers in the United States for music technology. I had access to the Moog 1 prototype. Like, I was able to play that before it even launched. And what I have to say was, when I was in that point in my life, I had enough money to live. I was living good. I was also over 300 pounds and wanted to off myself. So just because you have money doesn't mean that you're happy. And just because you have exposure to get your music out there and do things like that doesn't mean that you're happy. But if you're able to get your message out there and help another person, you'll see a lot more value in your life. And I've learned that. And when I started realizing that music shouldn't just be about me or my struggles. I mean, that does help me, right? But it shouldn't just be about people and the exposure. It allows you to ask deeper questions about yourself. And on top of that, help somebody else with whatever they may be struggling with. So if you made it this far in the video, thank you. I love you. God loves you. Jesus loves you. And understand that even though streaming is a scam, that doesn't mean stop making art, stop making music. What it means is direct your focus on the things that bring value to you and to other people, and don't be afraid to share them. Songwriter Support out.